if you're a great entrepreneur slash CEO, you're out there selling that every single day. You don't have all the answers about everything, but at least you could rationalize that, right? Now you can really build a financial model, and it's so important that you do that and start. I believe that I'm going to be able to do X. And do you know how many entrepreneurs can't walk in and build a rationalization, even in their own mind, versus talking to me or talking to an investor, right? They can't build that rationalization of what it is, how much money they need over what period of time. You've got to have the 12 to 18 month rationalization of what it is you're going to make, when you're going to start making money, and how much money you're going to spend along the way. And then you've got how many people you're going to hire and how much product you're going to buy over what period of time, and right? If you can't sit there and rationalize that thought process and articulate it, you're not going to make it.
Welcome to Business Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Mark Hockridge. Today, my guest is Roger Akers, the owner of Akers Capital, which focuses on early stage investments into emerging technology companies. After a very successful career leading his own IT consulting firm, Roger shifted his focus to investing into regional technology companies primarily, and has been doing that for over 25 years. Beyond investing, Roger served as an advisor and a mentor and board member on countless companies, educational institutions, incubators, and charities. He's been an unwavering driver of the startup ecosystem in Northern California and continues to actively help entrepreneurs to launch and scale their businesses. Roger, it's great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks for that warm introduction. That was very, very kind.
Well, honestly, I think with all you've done and continue to do, I'm not sure that introduction even does it all justice.
Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation today. Being able to pass along helpful hints and thoughts to people along the way, and hopefully we'll get to a few things that'll be helpful to people in that thought process, and they can take what they want from it. But also some of the points that are going to be discussed are going to have to be expanded. You can think through them and expand them, and maybe I can have a document that we can forward to people if they're
that'd be great.
Along the way.
That would be great. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that you'll drop tons of knowledge bombs here. So well, so you've been in the position to observe hundreds of companies, both as an operator, an advisor, and board member, as I mentioned, also as an investor. What do you see as the most common challenges that entrepreneurs face, and how can they try to avoid or overcome those?
Well, they're almost too numerous to count, but I have a few that are kind of my pet peeves, if you will. But let's just start out by number one. I see entrepreneurs all the time, and they struggle with lots of different components of building a business. But one of the very first one is the difference between a services-based business and a product-based business. And sometimes it's very, very difficult for people to really understand what the differences are between one and the other. And I think that coming to that understanding, even if you have a services business that has a product catalyst that can help, drive your value proposition, it's still a services business. And the way you finance services businesses is complete, in my opinion, after that initial startup capital that the entrepreneur is providing, is completely different than providing product-based type financing. And the difference, just subtle difference right there, is that with services business, you try to use debt and not undermine your equity position as an entrepreneur when you're building a services-based business, because you just don't, your multiples just aren't that high with service-based companies. Doesn't mean you can't make a lot of money. You just don't want to take equity investors if you can help it in those kind of businesses. And then with product-based businesses, obviously, then it opens up the door in the front end to allow you to take on equity investors because the multiples are so much higher. But you have to scale so much quicker when you're dealing with a product-based type environment.
Yeah,
So
is that both to seize the opportunity as well as just the nature of that type of business?
well, of course. I mean, when you're dealing with products and you're trying to evolve the business to capture and create the most value that you can, time is of the essence, and it costs a lot. Either way, in either type business, it costs a lot to scale and develop a business, and so time is your enemy relative to cost in the value creation. And so you always have to be thinking about speed of development and speed of value creation. And the second one that kind of comes to my mind in that arena is finding, and it's hard for some of these entrepreneurs, it's very, very difficult, but finding and appealing to great people to join the team and to join the effort. What do you sell? You don't have cash. You can't compete really from a salary perspective. So, how do you compete with that? And in my mind, that great entrepreneur slash CEO, and we'll come back to that maybe later. I'll come back to that later. But that entrepreneur has got to be able to sell personal growth and obviously the hope for the future that you're going to make a lot of money down the way, but you've got to be able to sell people personal growth as they go forward, and so that they can really expand where they sit in the world once they've completed this particular endeavor.
I was going to say, it seems like also selling maybe the mission or the cause, right? Getting somebody passionate about being a part of the company because of
Oh,
what they're going to go do, right?
oh, we're going to talk about that. There's something to say about that passion and making it their own company, and that's again part of that personal growth story that you have to build into those partners that you're going to bring on to help you grow the business, and do it inexpensively. you know, Another one that's very, very important, I think, that people kind of leave on the table, and part of it has to do sometimes with ego. Sometimes it's hard to find people to help or credible environments to help, but getting third party validation for what it is you're doing is very, very difficult in rationalizing the value creation that you're going to create with developing your business. And so going out and finding that third party validation from people that maybe don't have any skin in the game or stakeholder, but at the same time, they're willing to look you in the eye and say, this is good, and here's why. And this is why you're going to be successful with whether it's a technical issue or a market related issue, etc.
Yeah, boy, that's a funny one. I think, as a founder myself, I mean, there are times when people will blow sunshine up your ass about how good this idea is and you're going to go make a fortune, and then other times there's people that'll tell you for what is a good idea that's not going to work because they don't see the full vision or they don't understand, or it's completely a new category.
It's a new category, and they may not understand it. And those are not valid third-party validation entities. But I'll tell you, some that have worked very good for in the past, particularly with product-based businesses, are universities. To go really have universities drill it out for you, and they're willing to do it. Believe me, they have they're very, very helpful in that regard, and you can develop some good relationships there as well.
How
And
does somebody go about that? I mean, that's a great suggestion and such an amazing resource. Or you just go to the head of the business department?
I'd go to the business school. I'll give you an example. How many of these have been validated by UC Davis in different
Right.
and I'm not just talking about the business school, but the entrees in through the business school, but in molecular biology or in healthcare or on and on and on. When you have a product that kind of fits into one of those categories, go in and talk to those people, and you'd be surprised. They love it, and it kind of is a validation for their egos too, to
Sure.
say, you bet, I want to tear this apart and really figure out what makes it tick. And so that's just one example, but there are many other good, and I'll
I
raise
love
other
that.
points there along the way about how you build board members and how you grow board members, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But
I love that.
and then the next point in this for your question was having the ability. If you're an engineer and you've developed your baby, or you have that baby in your mind, it's just perfect. The way you've conceptualized it in your mind is just perfect, right? Well, just so you know, I've never seen a company yet, and a product yet, or a services yet, that hasn't evolved dramatically from the beginning to where it ends up creating real value. And so having the ability as an entrepreneur to really be able to evolve the idea beyond its beginning stages is really, really important. That's one of the key things that I look for when I'm looking at a company to invest in, is to
Right.
really understand whether they have the ability to evolve or whether they're just, I've got my
Locked
baby
in.
and I'm
Yeah.
not changing my baby.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, as I we talked about a little bit before, but that entrepreneur and building a company. So, how do you go out and find experienced board members and with relevant knowledge and expertise? And a lot of entrepreneurs at that one, they find that to be a terrific time sink. There's lots of time sinks out there. Time's
Yeah.
your enemy, as we talked about earlier. But that. But going out and investing time and finding the right board members is hard. It's very, very hard. And being critical of people that you talk to become board members is hard to do. And you make mistakes. And you have to figure out how to get them to put some skin in the game and figure out up front what they're going to be able to provide for you before you make that commitment. So
Right.
just 2 cents worth on that one.
Yeah.
But
No, I love that. I think it's oftentimes people approach that maybe from a lack of clarity of what it is that they need or want from a board. And then, if they're taking outsized capital, then there's also the factor that, you're getting a board seat taken just because they're representing their investment. And that may not be the one or the individual that's going to derive the most strategic value for you. So being very thoughtful and intentional about your board creation is critical. As a business grows and there's these inflection points where the things that got you here aren't necessarily the things that are going to get you to the same point. And this applies to a board as well. What is it that you're looking for to determine when a business has reached that inflection point, like when they're kind of reaching the ceiling and the need to pivot or the need to evolve?
well, there's three big ones in that one for me, and we'll just take them one at a time, maybe. But the first thing I have to start with is it relative to your business development strategy. When you actually have something to sell, or maybe you're selling a little bit in advance, but at least you're setting it up for when you actually do have something to sell. Which
You're
is,
right.
if you're a good entrepreneur, that's what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
But that business development strategy, obviously the very first thing you're going to go is try to, because it's your idea, you have a vision of who's going to buy it. So you're going to go out to the low hanging fruit, and you're going to go out there and try and exploit the low hanging fruit to sell it and validate the value creation relative to that, right? But that low hanging fruit doesn't last very long. And then you really have to start investing in the actual process of selling, right? And it's expensive, and you have to maybe hire people, and it's time consuming, and you have to figure out how to sell it. And we'll talk about some of that stuff along the way. But it's my opinion, right there is a critical mistake that many, many companies make. Right there is because if they don't take the time, because they're spending all their time on their product, right? They don't take the time to go do competitive analysis. And I've seen it time and time again. And then there's an adjunct to that follows along with that. But they don't take time to look at the competition. And how many of them have you looked at in the eye and they say, "Well, I really don't have any competition"? Well, that's when you want to turn around and run out the door, right? Because everything needs competition. You want competition because you want to beat them at their own game. And you and I have some personal experience about how we go beat the daylights out of the competition and create a lot of value that way, right? But so it's all I'm suggesting right there in this is you go look at what others are selling, how much they're selling it for, how they're selling it, what channels they're using to sell it, and I mean, there's some unnatural acts that have been done to go out and figure that out from the competitors. I've had people go out and interview with those other companies so that they can figure out how the companies operate. I know that sounds a little crazy, but you do whatever you can to do it and do it efficiently to look at the competitors and really drill it out. And from that, you come away with a lot of great information. But foremost among that is you figure out how to lower your cost, maybe of customer acquisition. Because now you might figure out what your pathway to sales is really going to be, and you can start drilling in to figure out how you're really going to accomplish and go do that. All right. And then the adjunct that I mentioned earlier that goes along with that is go look at complementary companies that are out there. And you might even find a couple of those competitors that might turn into complementary companies, just so you know. A giant corporation's always looking for an angle, right? Because they can't innovate. So what you do is you go look for complementary and look at complementary companies that might be able to drive you into channel and drive you into the marketplace. And I have to tell you, what a great opportunity that is to go find those. And immediately you're going to figure out how to lower your cost of customer acquisition and use their sales force to sell your stuff instead of you having to do all the heavy lifting on every sale, right?
100%. I mean, that becomes, if you can pull that off, it becomes a force multiplier, right? I mean, what a better way to get rapid traction in a market.
Yeah. Well, and then another one in my list here is uh, that inflection point where you have to start doing things different from just the initial startup mode, and you've got to evolve your business. And to me, where I go there is in your funding and your financing of your business. You're suddenly going to find out. I mean, it's a simple conversation in a way. I'm going to run out of money, or I don't have the money to go execute. I can't afford to go sell my stuff, even if it's good. I can't do it all myself, which is another key point. But all I'm suggesting there is, cash flowing initially is basically impossible. So you're going to kind of, regardless of the type of company, you're going to use friends, family, fools, whatever you can, do whatever you have to get from here to there. But then after you get to actually have a product established and a process established, then you can, and you have to start worrying about the costs of selling and scaling the business. Then you have to go out there and, particularly for product-based businesses, you have to go start talking to angels and go start talking to VCs, go and talk to those people that can help you and get the vision of where you want to go. And by the way, I'm just going to slip this in and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But board members, if you've done a good job of board members, maybe they'll invest too as friends, family, and fools, right? But if they're the right board members, they're going to have connections out there in the investment world for the VCs, et cetera, that can help take you and sell you with their credibility into those environments and help you with that process. And because doing it all yourself's almost impossible.
Yeah, it can be an exercise in futility. I agree. And
Sorry,
no, go ahead.
but I wanted, but I wanted to just point out right there, and then I've seen this one happen many, many times. Start 6 months before this happens. You've got to be able to anticipate what's coming start 6 months early, because believe me, if you wait 6 months and then start raising money, you're going to be scratching your head like, why didn't I start 6 months ago?
Yeah,
Just 2 cents worth on that
yeah,
one.
that has been my experience, 100%. I mean, every time entering into a funding round, you always have kind of optimistic expectations, like, oh, it's going to take me 3 months, and the reality is it's 6 or it's 9.
Ex-
Uh, yeah,
exactly. And then finally, in this topic area, here you are. You can't do it all yourself. You're trying to figure out how you're going to get it all done. I mean, you've got product, you've got sales, you've got finance, you've got everything. You got more to do than can ever be done, right? And so, what do you have to do? You got to start hiring people to help you, right? And it's and I could be criticized in this arena a little bit, but don't go hire a bunch of VPs, okay? Go hire great people that believe in the vision and grow them and work on growing them and have them work harder, and don't get so wrapped around titles or all that kind of stuff, because that's a waste of time. But really, grow people, hire great people, and sell career growth, sell personal growth to those people and say, look at what you're going to be able to do when you're done with this. We also, you and I have some common experiences of some fantastic people that
right,
weren't VPs, weren't
exactly,
very experienced, and they came in and did a fantastic job, and it set them up for the rest of their careers on some projects that you and I
right.
are involved in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I see that trap often where people rush out and hire a VP, and I think there can be circumstances to do that where maybe you're hiring the VP not only for their strategic capability, but because of the people that they drag along. Maybe a sales VP is an example, but in other cases,
You know what I call them?
hire in advance it's bad. Yeah, go ahead.
You know what I call them? Partners.
Exactly.
If you're dragging
Right.
somebody along, that means
Yeah,
you have to step up to the plate and make
that's
a
right.
commitment to the partner, right? And
Yeah,
we'll get into partners here in a couple of minutes, man. But
yeah,
that's my just a basic response to number two, if you will.
yeah. Let's double click a little bit into that competitive analysis. I know a week or so ago, you and I were talking about this in another conversation, and I'd like to just expand on that a bit. So, the importance of going out and doing that research, that market research, that competitive analysis, not just to follow what somebody else is doing, but to inform your go to market strategy or your positioning or I mean, everybody does it, of course, for pricing, but I mean, yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts about that.
Well, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but that whole strategy and how you build that out, again, it's like I'm a broken record in a way, but it's it's to go figure out how you're going to do what you're going to do. As we talked about before, you can go do competitive analysis, you can go complementary player analysis that we talked about earlier. But we to take that conversation a little bit further, and what that really does for you is now you actually get to figure out what you're going to be able to sell your product for, or your products for. You might have multiple products within the same vein, right? But you're going to be able to figure out how much you think you're going to be able to sell them for. And you can then back in to the whole conversation about how many of them and how much you're going to be able to sell over what period of time, and kind of get estimates on that. But even as important, go figure out then what you can back into the cost of production. You can figure out, you're starting to get a feel of what the cost of customer acquisition is going to be. And now magically, and you got to have this if you're ever going to go raise any money, you actually are going to then be able to really formulate and rationalize a financial model. Okay. And that all comes from a big catalyst for that is that competitive analysis and that complementary player analysis that we talked about before, if you do a deep enough dive. And that doesn't cover what your cost of product is, but that's where you're spending all your time anyway. So you're going to figure out what the cost of production is pretty fast. Although you have to pay close attention to what it costs to make 1 million of them instead of just 4, right? But nevertheless, you're going to be able to start rationalizing your financial model, which is absolutely critical relative to fundraising, uh, 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 and selling your business to customers. And another one that's kind of fun is you're going to have to sell to your suppliers too, because they're all going to be wondering. They're going to be all wondering if they're going to get paid. So you have to make vendors the suppliers are believers, vendors believers as well. And kind of the second one down that path that as we talked about is you can, and we talked about the cost of production and delivery, and facilities, staffing, all that. We talked about the competitive analysis, but I think that you could also, um, once you start understanding what your true value proposition is, something magical happens right there if you keep your eyes open. And you have to keep your eyes open and look at where you're really at versus where you want to be. But right there is a key point of where the business usually can evolve another step. Because now you can start saying, if I was just to do this, I can create this much more value and sell this much better and make higher margins on what am I selling that the customers are willing to buy. And right, it's right at that critical juncture that you get to take that next step of evolution. And I really like that. If you hear, as an investor, if you hear an entrepreneur and a team sit there and start telling you about your product evolution and your strategy relative to selling and why it's so critical that you need to do this from what it is you're currently doing, you just look at them and you go, that's my kind of a team. That's the kind of people that you want to know and embrace, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good takeaway right there. Um, if I and
And,
so
and
kind of backing up to your prior point, I mean about the kind of the competitive analysis and understand your value proposition and all that. I think there's also an opportunity that some people miss often, which is it's not just about seeing what they're doing and then following, but rather there's opportunity to find white space, right? Where is where are the gaps, and how can I approach the market in a different way that may either provide more value to the customer or make it such that I can acquire more at a faster velocity. So
it all evolves right there. And
yeah,
and there's great, if you're a great entrepreneur slash CEO, you're out there selling that every single day. You don't have all the answers about everything, but at least you could rationalize that, right?
yeah, 100%.
And then all I would suggest, I mean, I want to just add a little thing. Now you can really build a financial model, and it's so important that you do that and start. I believe that I'm going to be able to do X. And do you know how many entrepreneurs can't walk in and build a rationalization, even in their own mind, versus talking to me or talking to an investor, right? They can't build that rationalization of what it is, how much money they need over what period of time. And all I'm telling you is you've got to have the 12 to 18 month rationalization of what it is you're going to make, when you're going to start making money, maybe, but when you're going to start making money and how much money you're going to spend along the way. And then you've got how many people you're going to hire and how much product you're going to buy over what period of time and da, right? And I'll tell you, if if you can't sit there and rationalize that thought process and articulate it, you're not going to make it. You'll be one of the 19 out of 20 that don't make it. Okay, and I hate to be so negative about that, but there's reality there that if you don't build that rationalization with all that heavy lifting that has to occur, you're making a terrible mistake when you're trying to build a business. And just so you know, everybody around you, the people you're trying to hire, vendors, customers, they'll all recognize it as well. That they're all going to look at it and go, Yeah, I know that guy. He's having trouble seeing the forest for the trees, right?
Right. I'll take this as a pause moment to tell you, I mean, and to thank you, because early on in my career, you shared that piece of wisdom with me about the importance of a model, and connected me with a financial planner, financial modeler, to build an initial model. And I learned firsthand from him how to create a model and build it from the ground up from a set of assumptions that ultimately you continue to refine. But over the years, that skill has become immensely valuable and powerful for me, because to the degree you can walk in front of an investor or a client or your staff and be able to articulate very clearly all the things that go into it and to know your numbers, it just creates confidence and security for everybody and investors alike.
Figuring out, see, Mark, it's very, very critical that, see, you were a great analytic, okay? You were a great analytic. You enjoyed the analytics. You enjoyed the rationalization. But just so you know, you got to figure out who you are as that entrepreneur. What are you? Do you need to go find an analytic, or do
Right.
you need to go? Because I have to tell you, if you're an engineer, you have trouble doing that. Okay. I
Right.
hate to beat up on engineers, but I'm just using it as a metaphor. If you're an engineer, your ability to build that rationalization and articulate it is hard, because all you can do is talk about product, right?
Right.
And it's not enough. And so, but luckily, in that environment that we were just discussing, you were a great analytic and you picked it up and ran with it very, very quickly. But if you're an entrepreneur, you either have to develop those skills very, very quickly, or you need to go find an analytic to be able to do that rationalization and help you build that rationalization.
Yeah, I think it goes for all key roles. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't have all the arrows in our quiver, and so identifying where we have our gaps and then filling it with the people or assistants to round you out, I think is critical. Whether that's the analytics or maybe even the selling side of it, right? There's
Absolutely.
not a lot of CEOs that aren't good selling CEOs, and that's a hole that they need to fill.
That's correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So this is interesting. So this is kind of taking me a little bit down the path of, as an investor, as you're listening to, I can't even imagine the thousands of pitches you've listened to, but as you're listening to all of these pitches and trying to get deeper into their model and determine whether or not this is a worthy investment, what are the things that you look at, either as the business or as the leadership, that are the must-haves? And what are the things that just pop up as the big red flags that would just stop you in your tracks and have you walk out the door?
well, the it's kind of obvious, but the very first thing you look at is team. And you don't have the full team maybe built, but you've at least got one or two or three added into the thing. And so what quality of a job did you do and how did you sell it? And you look at those additional members of the team and you ask them, well, why are you here? And and they say, because I'm getting personal growth and I want to achieve something great, you know, and they understand the vision. But looking at the team and really understanding their motivations as to why they're there. It can't be the answer. Well, he's my cousin, and he thought that maybe I would be able to help him do something while I'm here. It just can't be that answer. It has to be, I'm here and have a purpose, and I'm good. We're going to make this successful. I've bought in 100%. Kind of a thought process. Another one that's again kind of goes back a bit to what we talked about earlier, but getting that third party validation. But and that stands on its own. But you really got to have a business idea that holds water. And I have to tell you, just yesterday I had a person call me, as they do, and this is a gentleman that thinks he can go plant trees at Superfund sites and have it suck up the bad juju from the soils around the Superfund sites and make an entire business out of that paradigm. And you know, it's all great to clean up Superfund sites and do whatever you can there. I mean, in Anaconda, Montana, they built 3 big golf courses on top of a Superfund site above a copper mine. Okay, that's absolutely gorgeous, and it does a good job for what it is they're doing there. But that gentleman has the passion to do what he wants to do, but the business acumen and the vision of what that really is and what the value creation is just not there. And you can find them very, very quickly, and you see if you can't get them to think beyond and what other opportunities might be. But a lot of times they're so invested in it intellectually that they can't get away from it. Another one is that we talked about before, and how we kind of got to the point of and rationalizing our financial plan. But right there, when you get to see maybe even the precursor of a valid financial plan as a potential investor, what you really want to do, if nothing else, in that first view is, does that plan build in a construct that holds everybody accountable? Okay. And how do you hold people accountable? It's not by yelling at them every day. It's not by having to tell them every single thing to do every day. You have to let them make mistakes. You have to let them go out and figure out what works for them in order to make success out of what they can bring to the party, right? And if you don't understand what I just said, then there's a longer conversation there. But,
there's a I don't know if you're familiar with Gino Wickman. He's the author of Entrepreneurial Operating System, and he has this framework of leadership plus management equals accountability. And in leadership, it's much about having clarity of vision and being able to articulate that. And then management is in making sure that you provide people with the tools and resources to get it done. And so it's not about a stick. It's about giving people the resources and clarity and allowing them to go and execute.
And then sit them down on a regular basis and ask them how they're doing against their technical plan. And if they're not doing it, ask them why they haven't accomplished it. And if they have do it, you tell them how great they are. I mean, it's not rocket science.
Exactly.
A lot of this stuff's not rocket science. But all I'm suggesting to you is, if you're not holding people accountable on an ongoing basis, it's a mistake.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's not rocket science, but what it is a discipline. As a leader and a manager, you have to be disciplined and approach it that way. Otherwise, things slip and become ineffective.
Yeah. And by the way, each one of those people that are on your team, they have to. You want to look at that team. I love testing this one. It's a good one. Figure out if they like being held accountable. It's real easy to test. I mean, you can dream up 1,000 different ways to do that. But figure, a lot of people. I can think of a couple of people that we know that you wouldn't think on the surface that they like being held accountable, but they really do.
Right.
Because actually, they're good at what they do, and they want to tell you what they've done.
Yeah.
And then appeal to your ego a little bit and ask you if you think you could make it better than what they're doing. And it becomes a very neat cycle that you get into with that accountability structure. Okay. But if none of these things we just talked about, if they don't exist, it's a red flag, as you pointed out. And but another one, just to add kind of a little precursor. Do people listen? Are they willing to work very, very hard? Are they willing to be accountable, that we just talked about? And here's a great one. Sorry to bring it in, but and people that don't lie. I hate to say this. There's a lot of people out in the world that lie a lot, and not on big stuff. It's just
That's
part
always
of
the
it.
more worrying thing when I think that I've seen is when people go out of their way to lie about small things. It really then
Yeah.
makes you
And
worry about the
I
big things.
and like I say, I hate bringing that up, but it's if you're evaluating and you're hiring people and that kind of thing, test them to see if they'll lie to you. It's a key because
Yeah.
then you can get rid of them quick. So you don't have to deal with it on an ongoing basis. But I've dealt with a lot of people that were good liars, and
Yeah.
and I
I yeah, I apply a framework. It was actually from Jeff Smart. Is the hiring methodology called Who, and it has some I'll call them tactics, but it was ways to kind of address something and then circle back to it later, and so it breaks up the continuity of the interview and allows you to tease out some of those truths or lack of truth, and yeah, I mean having a good framework for hiring is critical, and the costs of doing it poorly are just unbelievable.
so so that's how I
I
drill.
love it. I love it. So, it seems like I don't know if this is a trend, but I'm seeing more and more entrepreneurs, founders that are bootstrapping their businesses instead of taking outside money. But and I think you alluded to this earlier relative to even like product and service businesses, where maybe more appropriate to take capital on a product business because you need to go quickly. But when should entrepreneurs be thinking about outside funding, and when should they take the bootstrap route?
I actually believe bootstrapping is admirable. It goes back to the whole premise: never take a dollar you don't need ever, right? From anybody, whether it's a banker, investor, or whatever. But so that's easy. That's the easy side of thing, the bootstrapping conversation. But I've also seen some negative reasons as to why people bootstrap businesses. And that's where I think the flaw where it's worth pointing out what the flaw is in that thought process relative to bootstrapping, because there are people sincerely that they just don't want to listen to other people, and they want to do it their way, and they want to do it, and they don't want anybody else to telling them what to do or how to do it or whatever. And so they bootstrap it because they don't want to listen. Okay. And that happens. There are some people that are strong enough to make it with that, but that's one of them. Another one is their insecurity about their uncertainty around their product and their idea, because they're not fully invested in it yet, but they're trying something. They're going to try something because it's as good a thing as they can think of. So they're going to go try to run it up the flagpole, right? And so they bootstrap it, even though they're truly uncertain about about it. And then another one that's worth pointing out, I think, is if you're a founder, maybe a new entrepreneur, but even maybe more experienced, but are you still figuring out as a founder whether you truly have the personal commitment to really go in and really build your own business and build and take your real idea to market? Because let me tell you what, it's, as you well know, it's not for the faint of heart to step up to the plate and say, no matter what, I'm going to go make this happen. And I'm going to do all the unnatural acts that has to occur in order to make that happen. Are they still hedging on whether they're really truly committed to it or not? And you can see it when you're talking to people like that. You can see whether they're committed or not pretty fast because they're asking you what other ideas you have. you
Yeah,
know,
exactly. Or
but
they're talking about this as their plan B, and it's like no, you can't have a plan B. You got to be all in. And I think most folks that at the early entrepreneur stage, it's you don't even know what's in front of you, right? You have no
yeah,
idea
yeah.
the commitment and energy and time required. Yeah,
But
it's way more than you expect.
but then let's go back to the positive side just for a second on the people that bootstrap and don't want to spend a dollar that they don't have to spend. That's the person that's intriguing to watch and to follow, because when they finally get to a path where true value creation is starting to occur and the light bulbs all come on and and he or she is having success at convincing other people that this is a good idea, and da 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 da, right? Well, now that with that value creation occurring, and you can start leveraging that value creation in the marketplace with customers, with suppliers, with investors. And that's the time that those bootstrappers say, now it's time to step on the gas. I need help to step on the gas. And by the way, now I'm really very prepared relative to rationalizing how I'm going to do it and what I'm going to do over what period of time. And guess what happens when you go start to raise the money? You get to give away less of your business because your value proposition is high enough that you can demand people's money with at a lower cost. And you don't have to give away half of your company to get $500,000.
Yeah, I think also I mean, by doing that, inherently, you've hopefully worked out some of the kinks in your go to market or whatever it might be is more refined, and so your likelihood of being capital efficient when you take that money is much greater, right?
Exactly. So those are
That's great.
just a couple of thoughts there,
No, that's
but
great.
it's you could spend a day on that one.
I know.
That one's a lot of fun. But if go listen to that segment, all you entrepreneurs out there, go listen to that segment twice. Okay,
Yeah, exactly. No, there's
a lot of fun.
good stuff there.
If you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're bootstrapping for the right reasons, good for you. That's who I want to be associated with.
Yeah, yeah. I have a peer group of SaaS CEOs, and there's a large number of them that are bootstrapped. And again, I think it's admirable if you can create value and minimize, or eliminate any dilution. I think that's great in the concept. But if you're doing that at the expense of your ability to grow much larger, or you're doing it because, to your point, that you're uncertain, that's not great. Yeah.
Time is
time is critical. That's right.
So
that's right.
So
on one of the things that I see, having been down the road of raising capital a number of times, when you do take that capital, there's always a potential for misalignment, especially if you build a very extensive group of investors. So I've seen this surface in the form of timing, of risk tolerance, of even the strategic direction. Do you have any suggestions for how somebody goes about finding investors that have alignment, and maybe the questions that an entrepreneur should be thinking about to avoid misalignment?
Well, that's complex. This is a complex question because there's different things that fit in different circumstances relative to that. But I'll try to hit a few components if that's okay relative to that. But I think a great place to start, and it even goes back to the simple point of starting 6 months earlier, in a way, is don't when you're going to take and start looking for investors and setting expectations with people, investors, and others too, even staff, that kind of thing. Try to not be in a negative leverage position at the onset of the conversation, because it's so simple to figure out where the holes in a business are. I mean, if you've seen a bunch of successful businesses and a bunch of unsuccessful businesses, it's pretty easy to figure out where the holes are, right? So don't be in a negative leverage position when you start, if at all possible. And think about that up front. That's what this is all about, is that education process of how to set yourself up correctly, right? That's what we're talking about here. And so all I'm suggesting is just try not to be in that negative leverage position. And we can get into a little bit of what that means a little bit. But the minute you take a dollar, you have to understand that the clock starts ticking. That day, The moment that money hits your checking account, that clock starts ticking from the people that want a return on investment. Okay. And so if you're looking for misalignment, it's when people want their money back in 2 years, it's going to be 6. Okay. Get over it. It's 6. And so when you're setting expectations, don't sit there and set expectations. Oh, we'll be able to sell this thing for $80 million in 2 years. Let me tell you, that is a bad thing to say to anybody that knows what they're doing. Okay. Bad thing to say. And so just make sure that you're setting up yourself correctly and not trying to oversell. And we all have a tendency to oversell, okay? But because you want to tell people how good it's going to be, right? How wonderful it is, and show your passion, and we're going to take over the world with these products, and blah blah blah, right? But just don't oversell the fact that you're going to get $80 million in 2 years as a metaphor, right? I think a third one that uh, founders really need to understand what being a CEO means prior to taking the money. Okay. They need to be realistic. Okay. About what it really you need to do. And so many people start their own businesses with their great idea so they can be the boss. Okay. Well, let me tell you, of all the things we've talked about in this segment today, think about how many things the CEO has to orchestrate on an ongoing basis. And now you're an engineer with great product knowledge and you're supposed to do all this other stuff. And I have to tell you, if you take somebody's money, you better understand everything that we've talked about today in detail and not say, I don't want to do that or I don't want to do this. You're going to do it all. And by the way, it's not the end of the world if you can't or you won't do all of that. Okay. You can go hire a good CEO. You can hire CEOs that'll work for 8% of the stock and help drive the business going forward and use you as the fulcrum and the leverage because now you can wrap yourself in the road and be the genius. And you don't have to do some of the other heavy lifting. You can just be the genius and make the product work and make the customer happy, right? So don't think you have to be the CEO if you're not. That's why a lot of businesses fail, quite honestly. Another thing is, and I use that analogy, I'll just finish that one up a little bit, but if you're an engineer, you might want to have a partner in the business and give him 20% of the stock up front before any dilution occurs and have him be the CEO because that's what he's good at, but you're still in control because you got 80% of the stock. Okay. And so he cares what you think and you care what he thinks and what he brings to the table. So don't think it's the end of the world. All right. But you have to find the right guy that can orchestrate the things that we've talked about today. Another thing to talk about is that CEO has to manage investors and staff and hold everybody accountable while selling all the time. Does that sound like fun to you? Or does that sound like the worst thing you could think of? Ask yourself that question because it's not a trivial exercise, okay? And but holding people accountable is hard. Selling's hard. Building relationships with investors and keeping them informed and getting and managing those investors to get every friggin' thing you can out of them, not just the money. The money's the money. What you want to do is work them to death. You make them do you get them to do heavy lifting too, in addition to the
and that comes full circle to the thoughtfulness about who you bring in, both as a board but also as an investor.
It's critical. Yeah. Taking just money, terrible.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I used to call it kind of the difference between smart money and dumb money. I don't want to take a lot of dumb money if I don't have to.
that's correct. And so here's another one, and I'm getting a little technical here about the actual money component of the conversation. But what happens when you're building your plan? And early on, we talked about a 12 to 18-month plan, and now you're out raising money and setting expectations, lots of expectations, right? About what you're going to get accomplished when and all that kind of thing. Well, that initial alignment and selling that alignment right there is critical, because you're selling the founder, you're selling yourself on it, you're selling the staff on it, because they're the ones, hey, we've got to go get this accomplished in this amount of time, no ifs, ands, or buts, otherwise we're going to fail, da da da, right? And your stock options aren't going to vest if you're not successful, and all those kinds of things. But the other side of it is you've got this beautiful now rationalization of your plan that you've got established. And now you only have to give away 20-25% of your company to the guy that's going to give you $1 or $2 million, whatever the number is. It's going to last for 9 to 18 months, right? So now you've got your rationalization. You can set expectations of how fast you're going to spend the money, and they love it because you're building lots of value, and now you can set the expectations of what it is you're going to sell and how fast you're going to sell and what it is you're going to accomplish over time. And right there, you're going to be setting, not overselling, but you're going to tell them what reality is. Now, right there at that juncture, secrets, like I said, maybe try to only give 20-25% of your company away when you take that first jag of money. But you're not going to don't lose voting control in that for whatever you do. If you have to give 33% away or whatever, you have to do what you have to do. But just don't budge. Don't get in too big of a hurry to take that money. Say, no, I'm going to create a lot of value quick, and I got other people that I can get money from, blah, 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 right? But just make sure that you include in that initial cap table that you're building. If you don't know what a cap table is, figure it out right quick. Okay. We won't talk about that today, but include the stock option grants in the initial valuation so that the investor has to cover part of the cost of the stock options instead of you having to take all the burden of all of the stock options up front and then dilute everybody after with the new money coming in. Let that dilution occur to that initial investor as well. And somebody's out there in the audience probably going, yeah, that's hard to do. No, it's not hard to do. It's just say, hey, don't you believe in the people? We've got to keep them happy, and you're part of helping keep them happy. So you need to be a part of that process, guys. So, and have the confidence to say, by God, we've got the best team that there is. Okay.
Roger, that's
So,
a bunch of gold. I appreciate that. I think it's a good place to land it. But man,
I've got one last
okay,
thing, and that's that. I'll talk quick. Sorry, but
that's right.
it's evolving that strategic direction. I've never, like I say, I've never seen a company that hasn't evolved significantly over time, and alignment to the direction and realizing and setting the expectation that there's going to be change. Remember the plan that we did all this work on to rationalize what it is we're doing over what period of time? So what happens? Either things are going wrong or all that, but wouldn't it be nice if you walked in and said, I need another $1 million because we're evolving
Yeah,
the
so we're
company
crushing it.
here and we're going to create 3 times more value there, but I'm
Yeah,
going to have that other $1 million, guys.
that's right.
So always try to sell the fact on value creation, but just remember that alignment, because you ask him, don't you want to create value 3 times quicker if we do X, even if we need more money at not a much of an increase in valuation? And they'll
Of
say,
course,
absolutely.
of
Here's the
course they do.
money. Here's
Yeah,
the money, right? They'll help
absolutely.
you raise the money if they don't have it.
That's
So
right.
and that just underscores the last point. Investors, employees, everybody, they all have to be believers. And this is why the CEO is so critical, because he has to make everybody a believer,
I
right?
love it. I love it.
Everybody's a believer.
Yeah,
And so that's it
100%.
today.
Thank you, Roger. This has been fantastic. You dropped amazing value in this conversation, and we'll have to schedule another just to go deeper. But yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.